Cents Per Mile, featuring Charles Gracie and Paul Gibson, with loads of recruiting and marketing experience and backed by the largest driver audience in the world. We deliver carriers the driver perspective, find solutions, and help make sense.
Welcome to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. What are we talking about today, Charles?
Riverside just sucking. No, we're talking about independent contractors versus W-2 employees.
Yeah. We got Daren, the HR guy from CDLLife, on later to kind of talk about the difference. Maybe we'll approach it from kind of like a truck driver angle, with like a lot of lease purchase and stuff, but then also just in general, because it's good information to know. But before we do that, same stuff we do every time. So we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, we're on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So if you could subscribe, rate, helps us do some cooler stuff like we're doing later this year.
Yeah, and you can also go to centspermilepodcast.com. You can suggest a topic, to be a guest, even to send us to an event or be a sponsor.
Sponsor? Speaking of sponsors, who's our sponsor today, Charles?
TAFS. Factoring can be fun, and they're very fun, so check them out at TAFS.com.
They are fun, and I'm very excited to see them, hopefully at like the Broker Carrier Summit or F3 or wherever it's coming up. Great guys. If you get a chance to hang out with them, you definitely should. In that case, it is time for, this is going to be good. It's time for the news. All right, so it's time for 10-2 News, where we go over the most interesting, most relevant stories from the past couple weeks, and we talk about them. So this one's been posted around a lot, and there's a lot of interesting things about it. There's a lot of controversy around it. If you'd paid attention, probably by the time this airs. But Oklahoma officials vowed to continue the immigration crackdown that took 130 truck drivers off the road with the help of ICE last week. The Public Safety Commissioner, Tim Tipton, announced the continuation of the immigration crackdown on Tuesday, September 30th. The 3-day operation that preceded the announcement was conducted at the port of entry along eastbound Interstate 40 in Beckham County, Oklahoma. That enforcement blitz, called Operation Guardian, made contact with about 520 people. 25% of those people were not in the country legally, and 90% of those found to be in the country illegally were operating commercial motor vehicles. 20 troopers, employees from ICE, the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, and the Oklahoma Corporation Commission were all involved. Tipton said everybody was taken into custody without any resistance. Moving forward, we'll continue with these types of operations because our desire is to make sure that every Oklahoman is safe. And that blitz was reportedly focused on commercial trucks licensed and registered in California, citing laws in sanctuary states that may go against federal guidelines. On Monday, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt released a photo showing a CDL that said "no name given." And he said, if New York wants to hand out CDLs to illegal immigrants with no name given, that's on them, Stitt said. The moment they cross into Oklahoma, they answer to our laws. Oklahomans deserve safe highways, said Oklahoma Corporation Chair Kim David. And we appreciate the opportunity to assist ICE and DPS troops by removing non-compliant and dangerous drivers from our road. By working together as law enforcement partners, we're reducing risks for every driver. Our office professionalism and training and use of technology quickly assesses each driver and rig, resolve permitting concerns, issue a ticket with an associated fine, or require the driver to pull over and to submit further inspection for credentials or truck.
So I know that in certain cultures, someone might not have a last name, so one's assigned in some scenarios. We see it a lot in the Uzbeki community, and just like birth dates, not every community respects or needs a birth date, so they assign 1-1, and that's something we've learned in recruiting. But it is interesting when it comes to the ID front, because we're seeing with the fight of fraud, fraudulent CDLs, freight fraud, and everything else, it's kind of been catapulted to the front. And so you had this demonstration of a New York State license. First name was there. Last name was replaced with no name given. And that sparked quite a bit of controversy.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's also the thing. It's the interesting thing is like that's legal. And the thing is, the person who had it, because it says limited term CDL, which means that person is, they might not be a citizen, but they're here legally if that's the case. Because you have to show representation of that to get the CDL.
Yeah, no, you can't say that.
In New York, that's the requirement to get that.
Yeah, well, that's where things get a little bit convoluted, because just because New York gave you a CDL or a license in general doesn't mean that you're here legally. Doesn't mean that all the boxes are checked. Just means that they didn't do their job. And we saw that demonstration out of California.
So out of New York, which is where the license that he posted from, for a limited CDL, you must also provide verifiable documentary evidence of your temporary lawful status in the United States, which is checked through the Federal Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlement System, and the limitations of it.
But that's for New York if they're checking it. That doesn't mean that, one, those boxes were checked. That doesn't mean, two, that it matches the federal level. And CDLs are federally regulated. Just because they're issued at a state level doesn't mean that can be ignored.
Right. But I mean, but
not right.
I think what's right. No, I hear what you're saying, but what's interesting is this has been a practice. Like, it's not new.
Oh, so the way it's always been is the way it's going to be, and it's never going to change until it does.
Right. It's just, I get that. And that's what I'm saying is between a lot of this, it's interesting to watch the progression of it. And it's that we've focused a lot on attacking things that have maybe not been what lines up, but it's interesting to think about the things that, like, technically are okay, have been accepted as okay for a long time. It's interesting to see what is done eventually to, other than enforcement, there's not really been much done to actually make the change. And that's
it goes even deeper than that. So when I saw this, I wanted to try to validate before posting or discussing it. So I reached out to Dale Prax, and Dale's response was, we see these all the time. And to go a step further, there's many companies who enter no name given, first name unknown, last name unknown, not available even as John Doe. Contact name for their companies are redacted or not provided. They apply for operating authority like that. Then the agency grants authority anyway for some reason. So it's not just the drivers it's the company owners that are also able to do this. So how can we possibly prosecute, hold anyone accountable, or even serve a summons or subpoena if you don't know who they are?
Right. And so that's like the thing is, what I was getting at is, like, sure, you can enforce it, but with other things that have, like, found loopholes or other ways to go about it, what do you do to actually stop it? Other than stop it when you catch it, how do you prevent it?
Oh, I think you have to say, hey, this is how we operate here. This is what's required, and we don't allow these loopholes. We close the loopholes. We start holding states accountable to meet it at a federal level, and the federal government can't just put rules out there. They actually have to enforce said rules. They have to do a better job auditing those systems. If you're going to put it out there, enforce it.
Mm-hmm. But, like, I mean, how do you
enforce it? Well, I'd start combing through the database and saying, "Oh, that doesn't make sense. Revoked."
Well, I mean, even in, like, the free market, how do you get people to stop doing business with people who do business that way?
Well, I don't think you have to look at it from that front. I think the easier solution is going in and auditing what's already there. And if it's not right, revoke.
Right. But how do you get people to audit and go revoke?
You do it through the government. You don't need to do it at an individual level. I don't need Paul to go out there and audit what should have been done right the first time at a governmental level. I need the government to go out there and do it and say, hey, this business isn't correct, revoked. This license isn't correct, revoked. I think that's a great way to do it.
That's what I'm saying with these crackdowns. I'm interested to see if something like that does happen. And I think with, you can catch things, but just because you catch things doesn't obviously mean you caught all of it. And so it's interesting to think about if there were a wide audit that went across the board, what would that do would that completely change the landscape in the face of the transportation industry? How much of that is in there already? How much is baked in and just a part of all of it?
We know just on the non-domiciled CDLs, there's over 200,000 of them. So you got to assume that the numbers are astronomical, and at a number level, 200,000 is a lot. But when you look at the total CDLs out there, I mean, it's a dent, a very small dent, but nonetheless a dent. And what happens if you took 200,000 drivers off the road? Rates would represent that in certain areas, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, and it'd be interesting too, like with I think with the level of enthusiasm around enforcement, it makes me wonder if there would be a change, with this current administration and things that Duffy has done. I wouldn't put it past to just change the fact that, like, almost just make it you have to be a citizen to drive.
I think that's a little extreme, but I think you have to have all your ducks in a row. Like, citizenship should be the easiest entry point, but without citizenship, there should be some strong barriers to entry, and all the boxes need to be checked, not 90% of them, all of them. And if all of them aren't checked, then hey, thank you for playing. Find a different game.
Well, but beyond getting your permit and having your license and then actually showing documentation of your temporary lawful status, what else should there be? Because that's what you have to do to get one of these temporary New York licenses. What more do you do with that?
There should be. I honestly kind of disgusted that there is a limited term CDL. Like, you either meet the terms or you don't get one. It should be.
Well, but the limited term, the date of the expiration is the date that your legal date of not being legally here anymore is. So if you're legal, documented and legal to a certain date, your temporary CDL ends the day that your legal status ends.
Okay, so if it ends that date, then you would have to show up in person. There should be no online or anything. You have to show up in person, do it. I'm here for that. But what I'm not here for is, how do you identify an individual? How are you known, Paul Gibson?
Well, but here's okay, so that's a different story. The no name given, it's actually legal to only have one name in the US. You can actually change your name to one name, and it actually qualifies for passports. There are people with US passports who are 100% citizens who have one name, and then there is something to the extent on the second line.
Well, and there's entire communities and countries that operate with, like I said, no birth date. We see it a lot. In recruiting, you come across all kinds of weird stuff. I could tell you, in all my years of recruiting, I've never had anyone give me a license that had no name given on it, which, knowing that it's been around as long as it has, kind of baffles me that I haven't come across one of those. But I do think that as a industry, when we see our industry with a black eye in accident after accident, and not even the profile, but if you look at the series of what's happening here, it tends to come back to one group of people. Like, we had 3 articles in a week with all non-domiciled CDLs in them.
Yeah.
There's something to be said at that point.
Yeah, I'd be interested to look at the stats. I'd be interested to look at the stats to see if crashes are in general actually up too. Which is maybe.
It's either that, or everyone likes writing about people that have accidents that have non-domiciled CDLs, and the regular ones don't make the news. But I'd be more inclined to say that's probably not it.
I'd be curious. Actually, next week we're talking about insurance. So I'll definitely dive down that rabbit hole this week and have you some numbers for next week. But this ID is legit. If you don't like that, you got to change the system. But there were a bunch of people who shouldn't have been driving who did get caught.
Oh, yeah. This is what happens when you give out CDLs at the bottom of a cereal box or Cracker Jack box.
Yeah. But all right. Well, it's time to go behind the desk with Tenstreet.
Do you want to grow your fleet but get buried by paperwork, slow hiring processes, and outdated systems, all while struggling to comply with changing safety regulations? Enter Tenstreet, the all-in-one platform that simplifies driver lifecycle management by bringing marketing, recruiting, onboarding, safety, and retention together in one place. Tenstreet coordinates and streamlines all your operations. Post to dozens of job boards at once. Speed time to hire with pre-population and AI to get more full applications faster. And manage the entire post-hire process, from cutting costs with online onboarding to integrating all safety data into one dashboard, to improving retention through thoughtful engagement. Whether you have one truck or 1,000, our expert team is here to help. Sleep soundly knowing you can pass an audit, attract needed drivers, and achieve your business goals. Join the thousands of carriers using Tenstreet. Sign up for a demo today.
At TAFS, we offer unparalleled trucking excellence and service. Enjoy exclusive benefits like fantastic tire discounts and 1-hour advances for quick cash. Recognized as the top factoring company in 2023, we're your partner for success. Access business loans, manage finances with ease through our client portal, F2 fuel card, and mobile app. Contact us now to see how we can help your trucking business thrive.
All right, so it's time to make sense. And we're talking about the difference between like being W-2 and contractor. And so who better to bring on than an HR person? So we got Daren from CDLLife. How's it going, man?
Doing all right, Paul. How are you today?
Oh, doing pretty good. As my HR person, I feel like I always have to tell you that, even if I'm not. So, but yeah, so just real quick, so a professional can say it instead of us just launching out our opinions. What, from your perspective, what is the difference between a contractor and a W-2 employee?
So there are a number of different tests that come into play when you determine legally whether someone is a contractor versus an employee. But a contractor is someone who pays their own taxes, does not have benefits provided to them, tracks their own hours typically. Also, they are someone who has to submit a W-9 and will receive a 1099 tracking their revenue for services provided. An employee is a different animal. Employee, someone who fills out a W-4 and will receive a W-2 at the end of the year, and taxes are taken out of their check by their employer. A contractor is responsible for their own taxes.
Right. So a lot of times in trucking, especially with like lease purchase programs and stuff like that, you'll kind of see a little bit more of a blend. And I mean, obviously, you know, you being around the industry and stuff like that, you probably heard a bunch of stuff about it. And so like, it seems like there's a lot of situations where there are contractors who are treated like employees. And that's kind of our point of bringing this up, is that like, there's maybe some of the benefits of being an employee, but like the freedoms and stuff that come with being a contractor, under a lot of those leases and stuff like that, or even if you're not a full owner operator and you're leased onto a company, how do you have any idea how they get away with that legally versus like, so your situation, you know, like we've got contract employees at CDLLife, like you couldn't make them do some of those things that these drivers are made to do.
Yeah, that's correct. I think it's a balancing act in terms of whether or not you're a contractor, whether or not you're an employee. As I mentioned before, there are points of interest that are based on the tax code in terms of behavior and employment law. There are areas where someone may be riding that line, and I've certainly seen that in my history where contractors were treated as employees and vice versa. A contractor has a lot more flexibility, in my opinion, if you were deciding whether or not you wanted to be one or the other. So there are benefits, certainly specifically benefits to being an employee. But as a contractor, you do have a specific amount of freedom to work for other players, depending on your agreement, and also set your own hours. So there is a fine line. Some of this comes down to control, meaning how much does the company dictate what you do and how you do it, and do they give you the tools to do the job? Typically, that means you're more an employee than you're a contractor. but every situation has a nuance to it. It has enough gray area to it that it's always a hot topic in employment law.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and I wonder at like, it's interesting, especially like, with like the demonization of unions and the increase of right to work. Like what is the difference between the entitlements and like the things that you're secured by being a W-2 versus a contractor, or a contractor versus a W-2? What's the difference in that area?
Your protections as an employee are certainly different than your protections as a contractor. In other words, as an employee, there are elements of federal and state and local employment law that dictate behaviors that are allowed or not allowed in the workplace. You're right. Right to work is out there in a significant amount of states. And so, which means essentially the employer has the right to terminate you without cause. That does not mean without response, or that does not mean without a reaction. As a contractor, it's a different animal. Typically, it's very well defined in the contract agreement in terms of termination. And so your act or your ability to come back against the employer is limited, because as a contractor, typically it's very well defined. So in other words, you have more protections for you as an employee than you would as a contractor under this scenario.
Okay. So let's say that you're a contractor, right? And you go to work for an employer as a 1099 employee, but that that employer wants you to do things that weren't agreed upon in the contract. What does that look like?
Well, then it's incumbent upon the contractor to renegotiate or revisit the terms and conditions of the contract, because you're going to find yourself in breach of the contract if you're paying attention to what those terms and conditions are. That's where it differs again with employment. As an employee, to a certain extent, it's that last bullet on your job description that says other duties as assigned, right? As a contractor, there's a little more specificity in terms of the documents that you sign and the agreement that you have with your company, your organization.
So like when you say breach, so if I were asked to do something beyond my contract, especially like in like, say like a driver, or even just really any contract employee, and you say breach, like who is in breach and how does that part work?
If the organization or the employer, in this case, is asking the contractor to do things that are outside of the terms and conditions of the contract, that is the breach. So the employer is the breacher in this situation. And the contractor would be the one that would need to come back to the table and say, listen, we didn't agree upon this. Here's the terms and conditions. Here's what you're supposed to pay me. Here's what I'm supposed to do. And again, understandably, not every contract is very tightly defined. That's where you run into problems. It's just like as an employee status, not everything, you can't define every single activity, but you need to be as close as possible on the contract side, because again, that's what you're paying this person to do.
So I guess as a contractor, because a lot of our conversation is, about like, truck drivers and stuff. So like, while it might be broad, if there is something that like were to breach your contract as a contractor, what would you be in your rights to do out of that? If like you went to the employer and you're like, hey, this isn't in my contract, let's renegotiate or something like that. What would my rights be in that situation if the employer didn't want to do anything? If they're like, do it, you still got to do it. What are my rights at that point, since I have a contract? Like, can I just terminate? Like, do I just have the option to terminate it? What can I do in that scenario typically?
Depends on the agreement, because now you're in civil, right? You have a civil wrong that's happened. You have a breach of contract that happened. That's what you're alleging. And if there is no agreement, and depending on the agreement itself, arguably the breach would allow you to be in a position to terminate. However, agreements all differ, languages all differ. There may be a right to cure, which means there's a mediation to happen. A lot of different elements come into play versus just immediate termination on some agreements. Contracts are sticky sometimes. because typically the parties don't want immediate termination. They want some kind of a transition period if something isn't working out specifically. But that's typically where this goes. And there are a number of different legalistic areas that happen here between employer, employee, and contractor. But the lines are very specific in terms of employment law and employees, and the lines are specific in terms of contract law for contractors.
All right. Well, cool. And so I'll let you get out of here. I'm done playing 20 questions with you, but that's some pretty insightful information. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Paul. Have a great day.
Well, that was some good information from Daren. I think it's interesting to look at, obviously with the stuff that we talked about in the news, but then also as far as contractors go and stuff like that. There's so much fluidity in the trucking industry.
Too much.
Right. And it goes even from, like that, but like then even into contracts and non-competes and stuff like that. Man, sometimes I do things, I don't want more regulation, but sometimes I do wish there was more uniformity.
Yeah. Trucking has operated in the gray for a very long time. And I think, the more we hone in on that and define things definitively for everyone where it's not open to perception and interpretation, it's clear what the path is. I think we solve some of these problems. But hey, like all good things that got to come to an end, so does cents per mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. See you next time.